Good morning, students, especially the students of honors third year. This is a class for honors third year, and today I am going to deliver my first lecture on the course Introduction to Literary Criticism. So, the course title is Introduction to Literary Criticism. So, two things, it is introductory. So, you didn't have come across a course like this so far. And secondly, it is criticism. And as you know, when introduction, any course has introductory notes, then usually it follows the timeline, and representative texts from different timelines are set. And in that way, we have courses, we have texts like Aristotle's Poetics. This is from the classical period. Then we have Sidney's An Apology for Poetry. This is from Elizabethan period. And Dr. Johnson's Preface to Shakespeare. It is from 18th century. And from the Romantic period, we have William Wordsworth's Preface to Lyrical Ballads and Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Biographia Literaria. Now the question is, what is criticism? Now criticism, though you have not come across a course like criticism, but already you have done criticism in your classes and in your first year and second year exams. Why? Because in the Department of English, though we have literary texts in our syllabus, but what we actually do is criticism. Now again, if somebody asks, what is the product of the Department of English? What do you actually produce? The one single answer is our production, or what we produce is criticism. Now what does criticism do? Why is it important? It is important because criticism develops in individuals the power of critical thinking, and you know, the more a society has people with critical thinking, the better it is. If any society or a country don't have people who have critical thinking or who have the power of critical thinking, that society or country is sure to perish. So, criticism is very important for the change, for the betterment of society and understanding the world we live in and people we interact. Now, when you are working with English literature, then you should know that you already have stepped into the Western intellectual world. Now, the Western intellectual world has a beginning. It has a beginning. And the root of Western intellectual thought lies in the classical period, that is in the Greek world. And you must know that from that period of time, Western intellectual world has been evolved through a systematic and formal way. There is nothing arbitrary, there is nothing randomly put. Everything has been developed, everything has been evolved through a proper process. So, whatever people are thinking today, whatever individual's mindset is made, the way a mindset of a modern man is made or created, this is the continuation of a long process which can be termed as Western intellectual process or Western intellectual world. Now, today I will focus on the first text you have, Aristotle's Poetics. As I have said, the Western intellectual world has a rooting, has a starting point, and that is the ancient Greek world. So, before you start reading the texts of this particular course, you have to know something about the philosophy, about the start of philosophical thinking, and about the starting of how in that Greek period people first began to think about philosophy and literature and etc. and etc. Now, to understand this, first you have to know about the timeline. Now, when we talk about the common era, the timeline moves clockwise, like 1st century, 2nd century. And when we talk about the timeline of before the common era, then the movement goes anti-clockwise, like 1st century, 2nd century, and where I will stop is 5th century. Now, it is commonly argued that in that 5th century, in the Greek period, the footing of Western intellectual world is. And at that very crucial century, very important century, we have figures like Socrates. Then his student Plato. Then his student Aristotle. Now, they are the people who are responsible for beginning anything, from literature to science, from biology to cyber technology, whatever. These people have started the journey of modern inquiry or modern knowledge. Now, so before we go to the text or before we go to the syllabus or course, we have to know something very clearly. We have to have some ideas about something. Now, in that period, in 5th century, how was the Greek world? Actually, how were the people of that time? Apart from the scientific development, if you just keep aside technology, your YouTube, or modern technology and medical science, or whatever you call natural science. Apart from that, the people of the Greek period were as smart as you are in this 21st century. So, it is their thought that has been evolved and come to you. Now, in that Greek period, people were very much familiar with literature, and actually the society or even the state or even the government patronized people to get familiar with literature. And what literature actually people were familiar with, that is Iliad, especially Iliad and Odyssey. Iliad was written by Homer, you know, and probably Iliad was written in 8th century, 200 years back. Now, then they have tragedy, they have comedy, and what is today we have like the Bible, the Quran. You can imagine that, you can think that the Iliad and the tragedy and comedy had the same type, same sort of effect on the people of the ancient Greek. So, what is Bible today? The Iliad was that type of text in that period. Now, what did or what does Iliad deal with, or what do these literary texts actually deal with? Another thing, these are orally composed, they were not composed in a written way. They actually dealt with gods and goddesses. So, actually, though they were literary texts, they had religious overtones, they had religious effects on the people. Second thing, you have to know that in that Greek period, they didn't have any concept of country like we have. Actually, at that time, they had what is called city-state, and that is in Greek called polis. City-state means every city is independent with independent sovereignty, with its own government, and there is no concept like country. Now the city-state, the most powerful or the most important city was Athens. So in the 5th century, Athens was the most important cities of the Greek culture, and around Athens there are other cities with Athens at the top, and they had a league that was called Delian League. Now another point is that this league or this city of Athens had a rival, had an enemy, and the city of the rival city-state is Sparta, and they also had a league. Some other cities, they joined together and made another league that is called Peloponnesian League. You see, so there are two leagues. One is the Delian League, where Athens is at the head, and the Peloponnesian League, where the city of Sparta is at the head. Now, they differed on many respects. First, Athens practiced democracy, and Sparta practiced oligarchy. Oligarchy in Bangla, Rajtantra. This is one thing. And there were differences. There were differences, ideological differences, and these differences finally came to a war. And that war was known as Peloponnesian War. It continued for long 27 years, starting at 431 BCE and ending at 404 BCE. Now, why these things are important? These things are important because now while the Peloponnesian War was going on, then Athens suffered another trauma. That not that from the very beginning Athens was enjoying democracy. Actually, there was oligarchy in Athens long before, but the people of Athens abolished oligarchy and established democracy. So when the war between Athens and Sparta was going on, then the defeated party who were in favor of oligarchy, they made a coup. So Athens had to confront two enemies, one externally Sparta and one internally the oligarchical party. Now, in the year of 404, Athens was defeated by Sparta. Sparta owned, but within 1 year, Athens could regain its democracy. Why it is important? It is important because Socrates did not believe in democracy, and Socrates had some relatives with the oligarchical party inside Athens. So when the war was over, when Athens could restore his power, then Athens, the government of Athens, became repressive. The government of Athens became repressive, and in a crisis like that, at that hours of crisis, they accused Socrates on the ground of ethical charges. But actually, underneath it was political. And Socrates was charged that he was corrupting people, corrupting the youth, and thereby he was condemned to death. And so far Socrates was the teacher of Plato. Plato was greatly shocked. So the question is, what was the problem with Socrates? How did Socrates think that did not actually caused anger to the government of Athens? First thing is that, Iliad or tragedy or comedy, what I was saying, that one thing, these things, now Iliad just played the role of the Bible, and other texts of literature was like today you have YouTube, you have media, different types of media. So the way you are involved with different type of media, the people of that period were also involved with literary text. They had great influence on their lives. Now these texts involved gods and goddesses, and if you go through the text, you will see the gods and goddesses are not consistent. They have so many lower sort of qualities, like they are vengeful, they are lusty, they are highly charged with emotions, which are actually the attributes of human beings. And not only the attributes of human beings, but the lower types of attributes of human beings, which we find gods and goddesses carried. And that was the thing Socrates objected. Socrates, according to the view of Socrates, gods and goddesses should be consistent. They cannot be fickle. Okay, one thing. And so Socrates' belief came in contradiction with the common beliefs of people. One thing. So therefore Socrates had to die. He can be termed as an intellectual martyr. Okay. Now Plato, his student, he took the case and he developed a philosophy. He developed a philosophy in his book called The Republic. Okay. In Republic, if I make short, in Republic he developed some ideas. I will just give a summary of them. First is that Plato argued that literature has nothing to deal with intellectual or rational faculty. Literature is completely what is called inspiration. So the poets being inspired, they write something, and so far it doesn't have any intellectual property. So these writings excite the emotional side of people, and therefore the readers or the audience become emotionally charged, and which is not good for a healthy society. So far Plato thinks, because if there is no working of rational faculty, then it is not healthy to healthy society. This is one thing, inspiration. Second thing, Plato developed a philosophical development which may seem to very peculiar to you, that Plato believed our world is not the real world. There is somewhere a real world, ideal world. Somewhere there is an ideal world, and our world is just the copy of that ideal world. Okay. Therefore, our world is subject to change, whereas according to Plato, the ideal world is never subject to change. Now, now in this 21st century, you may question this sort of idea as totally absurd, you may laugh at, but if you are a believer and if you think in any way in the afterworld, then that afterworld may be in some way compared to that ideal world. Now, to Plato, our real world, the world we live in, is the copy of the ideal world. So, our real world is second hand. Now, what do the poets do? They copy the real world we live in. So, our real world is a second hand copy of the ideal world, and the poets copy this real world. What they produce is a third hand copy. Okay. So, what Plato says, literature is twice removed from reality, twice removed. First, our real world is first removed from the real world. This present world is first removed from the ideal world, and what the literature does, it copies the this world, so it is twice removed from the real world. So, that sort of idea was developed by Plato, which somehow his student Aristotle could not agree with. Now, Aristotle defended poetry against the complaints or against the objections Plato made. Now, that defense that Aristotle made, especially against the opinions of Plato, has been we can find them in his book Poetics, that is in your syllabus, Poetics. So, Aristotle's defense against the objections of Plato has been recorded in Poetics. I will conclude the lecture. So, let me finish briefly. That is, the point is Plato emphasized on the content of literature. As you said, it is twice removed. So, according to Plato, what important is the content of literature which corrupt its audience. Now, Aristotle took a totally different way of looking at literature. He did not talk about content. What important to Aristotle is the pattern, is the form. Aristotle says in Poetics, which we will see in the second lecture, Aristotle says in Poetics that though our world is subject to change, but it has some invisible internal principles, pattern, some forms that cannot be understood in a normal way. What poets actually do, they try to look beneath the objects and they try to search and find out those principles and those objects, those forms and structure. So, what poets actually produce is not the copy. When they produce poetry, their production or their poetry is very much charged with the internal laws, patterns and structure of the world. So, poetry does not say what it is. Poetry rather says what it should be or it ought to be. Why? Because poetry is not something illogically written or illogically composed. Poetry is composed by observing and by using the internal and invisible rules of the world we live in. So, when Plato emphasized content, Aristotle emphasized internal structure, observation, and you know for that particular reason Aristotle is called the father of science, because he has first developed the idea that we should observe world, we should observe nature, we should try to find out the internal rules and patterns and structure of nature of the world. In that way, not only Aristotle defended poetry, but he also laid foundations of modern science. Another thing, the question is inspiration. Now, you might have thought that probably Aristotle would defend inspiration, but Aristotle actually didn't say anything about inspiration, but this objection has been picked up and celebrated by the Romantic poets in the 19th century. You see, Wordsworth says poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So what Plato objected has been celebrated by the Romantics almost 2000 after 2000 years or more than 2000 years. So in the next class, we shall try to focus on the text poetics, where Aristotle has tried to systematically look at poetry and try to find out the systematical forms, patterns and structure of poetry. Till then, thank you very much.